bit odd. For some reason, our music wasn't playing there on the opening, Charles, but welcome.
Great to be back.
Good to have you on this International Thursday morning. We've got a very special guest with us today, Mr. Michael Smith. Hello, Michael. How are you?
G'day, gentlemen. I'm well. In the opposite end of the world so far as time zones is concerned.
Yes, indeed. Good on you, as they might say down under.
Good on you too for taking an interest in this matter, because as an Aussie, as an Australian, to see so much of our money flow out the window to these crooked Clintons, it makes your blood boil. And what makes your blood boil even more is the fact that so little has been done to get our money back. I hope you can help us.
Well, that's the goal for sure.
We'll do all we can.
We've got the champion of rooting out complex financial frauds, of course, and we're going to get right into it today. What can you tell us about it, Michael?
Well, Alex Downer is in the news at the moment. Alexander Downer was Australia's foreign minister back in the 2006. And he rubbed shoulders with the Clintons and fell, he became starstruck with them. And like so many people, he wanted the photo, he fawned, he sucked up would be the Australian expression. He sucked up big time to Bill Clinton. In fact, when he had Clinton in Sydney, Alexander Downer obsequiously said to him, "Oh, President Clinton, I've read your memoirs and I'm going to write my own. And I can tell you that you will feature large in my memoirs as well." It was sickening, this display, to watch a corrupt crook, Clinton, who, by the way, was in Australia under the tutelage of our biggest sort of PR impresario, a bloke called Max Markson. Max is noted for bikini girls in pavlova sitting competitions. A pavlova is a dessert made of whipped cream, so use your imagination. Wet t-shirt competitions, dwarf throwing, and he said his biggest claim to fame was bringing Bill Clinton out to Australia to give speeches to, people who want to be motivated in business who had a lot of money to spend, or more money than sense. And in between the golf tournaments and the boat trips on the harbour, Clinton found time. Crook as a dog, by the way, shocking hangover. Look at the photos. Head in his hands. He didn't all of his commitments with the Australian government. He only did the signing commitment and then didn't turn up for the press conference. But that was to sign a $25 million memorandum of understanding with Alexander Downer. $25 million for Clinton. Oh, the MOUs that require Clinton to put money in, money that never materialises, but money that came out of the Australian coffers, quick smart, for Clinton to do HIV and AIDS work throughout the Asia Pacific. Now, I don't know how much detail you want from me, but I can give you chapter and verse for an hour and a half about the deficiencies in the contracts and what have you. Number one is that Clinton signed as representing the Clinton Foundation and the Clinton HIV AIDS Initiative. Now, at that time, he was a disbarred lawyer. He could not, because of the fact of his perjury court hearings and the substantial fines that had been imposed on him, and the fact that he was disbarred as a lawyer in Arkansas and federally in the United States, he couldn't be associated with the management of a charity. But Australia still recognised him holding himself out as the founder and managerial representative of the Clinton Foundation, and said, "What a great fellow are you, Bill? How about $25 million to go and help fight HIV/AIDS in Papua New Guinea, Indonesia and Vietnam?" Well, what happened next will absolutely rock your socks. You want to hear it?
Yes, sir. You got us. You got our attention.
Hanging on your every word.
I thought I'd been talking for too long, and there's three of us here. So what happened next is, after this MOU was signed, in between the dwarf throwing and the pavlova sitting and the bikinis and the golf tournaments and Bill's hangover, Bill engaged, because our first target area was Papua New Guinea, right? So it's the northern neighbour of Australia, fairly close. At low tide, you pretty much could wade between Papua New Guinea and Australia. And there was a very big scare campaign at the time about the extent of HIV/AIDS in PNG. And a lot of people in Australia were saying, "Oh my God, what if this, it just jumps the Torres Strait And next thing, it's in Northern Australia, and it's right through Australia. And the government responded to that with heaps and heaps and heaps of money, which Bill must have sniffed out from Little Rock. He's gone, oh, you little beauty, better slip over to Australia and get our hooks into that. So he gets this contract for Papua New Guinea, and he engages, first up, a person to run the contract for him. You would expect or hope that the person would have some credentials in epidemiology or in charities or NGOs or international affairs.
Cocktail waitressing, something.
Oh, she's got a more bizarre history than cocktail waitressing. Her name was Ruby Shane. And besides being, you would think, fairly, full-time committed, because she also represented Clinton in everything else that he did through the Asia Pacific. She was his climate change person. She was the green cities person. She was the HIV/AIDS person. She was the Clinton, whatever he had going through the Asia Pacific, she was the person who was the front person for it. But she also had a full-time job, and that was running the Caterpillar earth-moving dealership for Vietnam. Wow. So she lived in Vietnam. Her husband was American, and he was pretty close to Clinton as well. So you can see the connection there. And she's the person who had a name on the contracts to run the Clinton HIV/AIDS initiative in Papua New Guinea. Now, as things started to heat up in PNG, and keep in mind, 25 mil, it's a fairly substantial amount of money, they decided that they'd have to get somebody in country in PNG to run their HIV/AIDS business. So this is the second person. You would hope that the second person would have a background in medicine or a background in running big contracts or employing experts or stuff like that. Well, sadly, old Zachary Katz, I shouldn't say old Zachary Katz, because Zachary Katz was 20-something, 22, 23, and he was in his first ever out of university at the time, working in New York, not in Papua New Guinea, never had a job outside of the United States, and his job then was as an accounts payable clerk at an insurance company. So accounts would come in for payment, and Zachary Katz, straight out of university, would look at them and do the paperwork, and he had that stamp, and he'd go clank, put the stamp on the accounts payables, write the checks, and bosses would sign it, and out they go. That's his work experience. Clinton and Ira Magaziner put this young bloke in to New Guinea. Like, New Guinea is frontiersville, and it's also the most corrupt nation on earth. You know, Zimbabwe and President Mugabe, on the corruption index, they were at number, I don't know, say 130. Papua New Guinea was 30 numbers below them. Wow. So Michael Somare, the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, he was stuffing the pockets with his family. It was a complex, corrupt, difficult place to manoeuvre and navigate if you're an expert. If you're a 22-year-old kid whose only job has been doing the accounts payable for an insurance company, you've got Buckley's and none chance of making a dent or, properly managing proper governance arrangements, a complex funding agreement with a government, between two governments, between Australia and Papua New Guinea. Zachary Katz had no chance whatsoever of doing that. And that is why, I'll give you a few quotes. That is why the audit report in relation to this first contract that Alexander Downer, the guy who's now trying to tip the bucket on Trump, pot, kettle black, or what, here's the audit report. It says this: a funding agreement was signed in July 2006 between the Government of Australia and CHAI. That then was the Clinton HIV/AIDS initiative. This outlined the terms and conditions of the arrangement between AusAid and CHIA in PNG. And this is the important part. It's a direct quote. This agreement is written in it, it says this: the parties agree to monitor the program against program milestones and to evaluate it against program outcomes, right? So that's in the contract. Except the defining document against which this is to occur was never completed. And as the audit says, it is, quote, therefore impossible for this part of the funding agreement to be adhered to. The funding agreement is further compromised by the description of the reporting requirements, which at no time specifies that the project must report or have any indicators of outcomes. It's then got a section called monitoring and evaluation, and it says this: this section of the report assesses whether the monitoring and evaluation framework effectively measures progress towards meeting project objectives. It therefore assumes that there is a monitoring and evaluation framework for the project with clearly stated objectives and indicators to use for measuring their achievement. This was not the case with the Clinton HIV/AIDS initiative. How in God's name could a government like ours contract with a shyster, a con man, racket man Clinton, who pretends that he's associated with a charity which has been approved for the purpose of building a presidential library only, and puts into place a kid straight out of school in New York to run this big contract in Papua New Guinea, frontier country, with no, oh my God, no guidelines, no milestones, etc. And then, when this is brought to the attention of the government, they go, oh, but this is with Bill Clinton and Hillary, and she's Secretary of State, and we really like them because, you know, they help you out after you've been in government. They get you a really good job with the UN.
Yeah.
Like, Downer, Alexander Downer got the special envoy to Cyprus. When he stopped being foreign minister, he became the UN special envoy to Cyprus.
You know, Michael, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think that most of our listeners, possibly to your surprise, will not be shocked to hear anything that you're saying, because it is absolutely in line with everything that Charles has been describing in terms of putting young, inexperienced people into these roles, relying on their charismatic kind of nature to just suck people into these crazy things.
Yeah, the other thing, Michael, I wonder if what we could do before we get much more deeply into the detail, and we do have a slide presentation we want to go through with your help, showcasing some of your excellent deep diving work that you did 12, 18 months ago that really should get attention today, particularly as Alexander Downer features front and center in the narrative in the United States of America. He's the one who's meddling, it would seem, colluding with the New York Times, with a deeply conflicted New York Times reporter. But before we get into all that, I wonder if you couldn't take a few minutes and just tell our audience more about your background, because it's an unusual, excellent background for doing real investigative journalism. And you come out of this with a long career actually as a detective, and perhaps you could explain a little bit of that to our audience.
Yep, sure. I joined the Victoria Police. Victoria is a state of New South Wales. The police force there is about 10,000 strong at the time that I joined. I joined in 1986. I was ducks in my squads at the academy, got a few awards.
What does that mean, Michael?
Worked at a couple of inner city.
What does that mean? What does ducks mean?
Ducks means came first.
Okay.
Graduated in the police force. Seniority is a big issue because you get a number, a register number, and the lower your number, the more senior you are. So I was the most senior out of my squad. And I got at the time that we went through the academy, a young policewoman had been murdered in a car bombing outside the police headquarters. Her name was Angela Taylor, and her funeral took place at the police academy, which has a beautiful old chapel. It was an old monastery, and it was a shock to Melbourne. And a memorial prize was instituted in her name, the Angela Taylor Memorial Prize, and I won that in '86. Went to a couple of fairly busy inner urban police stations where, we were processing a lot of offenders, a lot of crooks. I was involved in a few fraud matters. I wouldn't say as complex as anything like this, but they were introductory, for me to understand the points of proof in fraud and what is a genuine fraud, what's borderline, what's not. I then got into business, had my own business for a little while, joined the big telecoms business in Australia and was sent to Indonesia. I was CEO of a mobile telecoms business in Indonesia, ran that in the Indonesian language. All my staff were Indonesian. Then ran our Australia's big telecom, Telstra is the company's name, ran our global satellite business.
Wow.
So I had dealerships and operations right through the Asia Pacific, established businesses in South Korea, in China, through the Philippines, in fact right through the major countries of the Asia Pac. We had a satellite earth station in Sakhalin Island, just off Vladivostok, in the Laurentides in Canada. We had operations in the UK. I was responsible for Australia's investment in Inmarsat, the NGO, the International Maritime Satellite Organisation. Spent a while with some guys, merchant bankers from Canada, buying satellite assets. We bought British Telecom satellite business for $250 million. Was with Vodafone, the phone company, for a little while, and sort of a little like you, Charles. I semi-retired, fairly young. Was on the board of a symphony orchestra and had the privilege of running that symphony orchestra as the general manager for a while. And I was the chairman of the advisory board at the University of Queensland, which is one of our sort of, sandstone, the big universities in Australia. I ran the business, advisory board for the business school. So that's economics, law, and business, BEL. And gave a lot of speeches. The guy that ran the talkback radio station in Queensland heard me give a few speeches. He said, "Do you want to try your hand on the radio?" And I was a bit fearless, had no safety net and no idea what I was getting into. I said, "Yeah, sure, I'll give that a go." Started with 1 hour a day and then ended up with 3 hours a day on the radio.
Wow.
Sounds like somebody I know.
From 2007 till 2011. And in 2011, I encountered a crooked politician. Having the police background, it was pretty easy to interview him, which I did after shaming him to come on the air. I had a heap of credit card chits which showed that. And this politician's name was Craig Thompson. Just Google him, Craig Thompson and Michael Smith, my name. I was with a radio station called 2UE at the time. Craig Thompson had been a union official, and it's a very traditional path for union officials in Australia to go to the federal parliament as a sinecure, basically. And I got my hands on some credit card chits that showed Mr. Thompson had been using union members' money and a union credit card to pay for a heap of hookers. One night, our money was about the same as yours. So one night, he went through $2,850 on the union credit card in one night.
Was he entertaining?
Now that's party time.
Was he entertaining Bill Clinton?
Charles, that is one line of inquiry I've yet to pursue. I better get the dates out, and because it was in 2006. Clinton was around at the time. Oh, gee whiz, Charles. You're a source of immense inspiration. Anyhow, I got this bloke, Craig Thompson, on the radio and interviewed him like I would have interviewed an offender as a policeman. I said, Craig, you'd be aware of this credit card chit. It's got your driver's license number on the back. It's got your signature on the front. They've got a photo of your driver's license that's stored in their voucher system with your credit card. How'd all these details get there? He said to me, anyway, it was a fun interview for me. I don't think it was fun for Craig. And he ended up in a heap of strife. A heap of charges against him. And ultimately, he was sanctioned by the Parliament for having misled it because are you allowed to say bullshit on the radio in America?
Sure,
he bullshitted big time. Big time.
Bigly.
He spoke through his backside.
The question that immediately comes to mind, Michael, have these guys never heard of cash?
Mate, we had, the guy that actor, Sacha Baron Cohen, that plays Borat, and he played General Aladdin from General Aladdin, the great dictator. He came on television in Australia to promote his movie. He says, "I'm very much in awe of your Craig Thompson. Craig, I know you want to use a government credit card for the frequent flyer points. What I did with insert name of actress," said Aladdin, "would have sent me around the world on frequent flyer points. But what's wrong with cash? What's wrong with cash? Always for the hookers. Cash, Craig, cash." I think what happened, Craig did, he took 105 grand out through the ATMs. I think he was just, on the nights that he was too lazy to get out of bed, he just flashed the credit card and called the hookers and had them, drop in. It was an amazing story. But that led me to another story of union corruption that involved a much more serious one.
I'm sorry to interject, Michael, but on a serious note, this type of brazen activity really shows you how complacent these guys become in doing things that are just obviously totally inappropriate.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely right. and they form a belief in their own invincibility, and they are protected by others in the movement, fellow travellers. I mean, I found that at every level with Thompson, and it wasn't until he fell through a heap of perceived safety nets, this will be hosed down, there will be no complaint to police from the union, there will be no production of these documents, there will be no verification from the credit card company, all this crap, right? He fell through a heap of safety nets until the very end, and it was only at the very end that his party disowned him. It was only at the very end, when the weight of evidence was unequivocal and overwhelming and the public pressure was insurmountable, it was only then that they said, my God. In fact, it was Gillard, the Prime Minister at the time, who at a press conference said, they uttered these immortal words: a line has been crossed with Craig Thompson, and I have asked him to resign because a line has been crossed. Well, there was no change in material facts. She was aware from the very beginning as to precisely what he had done. The line that had been crossed was this accretion of public pressure and the inevitability of him being charged, and it was only at the very end that this line was crossed and that she disowned him. Now, that's the same with Alex Downer and the Clintons. It's the same with Downer's successor in his own party, Julie Bishop, the celebrity chaser from Central Casting, who has also sucked up to the... And it is only, I think, when people like Charles and yourself, Jason, and in Australia me, continue and find the drive internally somehow to continue, it's only when that public pressure and the public agitation gets to that sort of critical mass that we'll find people in politics who suddenly discover, oh my God, how long has this been going on?
That's a great introduction, Michael. Actually, let us go into the slides together now and get into this in some depth. And thank you for giving our listeners some background on your fine career.
My pleasure.
So basically, what we have been showcasing on this channel, Crowdsource the Truth, and Jason, how many subscribers do you now have?
Oh, we've passed 40,000, about 40,500.
Wow, that's probably thanks to Michael.
Definitely.
Good on you.
And so we've been showcasing this idea that when people talk about globalism, what they're really talking about is anarchy. They're talking about unregulated pretense of having a globalist government that allow people like Thompson and people like Gillard and people like Downer and certainly the Clintons and their acolytes to go around the world asserting that they're pursuing these causes that sound great in the celebrity sessions when they talk about what they're going to do next. But there's no checking of anything. There's no checking in Australia. There's no checking in Papua New Guinea. There's no checking in the United States of America until now, possibly under the Trump administration. And we've been going country by country, examining why it is these various countries like yours in Australia, why would a government as advanced as Australia that has so many pressing financial needs inside its own borders, why would the Australian government part with tens of millions of dollars towards a charity that is an obvious fraud for so many years? And why would nobody in Australia want to get the money back? And that's what we're going to try to... I think the Clintons crossed a line last year, and they lost at the line last year, and it's taken since after November 8th, 2016 to the present to get people around the world agitated, but I think they're now agitated. Michael, I don't know if you know that we have this nice picture here of Mrs. Bill on top of her book, What Happened, and the reason, in case anybody's wondering about the candle, don't think about the fire that happened in Chappaqua in the last 24 hours, suspicious fire, and we would invite our viewers to comment with what they think actually happened in the Chappaqua fire. What are the real reasons for the... And that's why this candle will remain lit during the whole presentation, just in case anybody's wondering.
Sort of a symbolic tribute to the spoliation of evidence. Now, Charles, what was the line that you feel the Clintons crossed in 2017 or 16? I thought they crossed it in the 80s.
Well, they didn't win. So
they failed to cross the line.
Yeah, they failed to come across the line. And that was, I think what we're going to find, and we won't steal the thunder of the presentation, but what we're going to find soon is that the real collusion has nothing to do with Russia and everything to do with the globalist elites around the world deciding First, that Obama had to win and had to look good. So they covered up his real record and gave him the Nobel Peace Prize, covered up his mistakes, gamed all the media companies around the world from really getting to the bottom of what was wrong with the administration. And then they knew that no Republican would continue the game. Maybe Jeb Bush would have played along, but it's unlikely that Jeb would have won anyway, and they figured that they had to install Hillary Clinton as the successor to Barack Obama at all costs. That's the real collusion that actually occurred. But once Trump won unexpectedly to some, on the 8th, the deep state and the people engaged in collusion did all that they could to try to stop him from being a success, stop him from being inaugurated, stop him from actually working.
They continue to do everything they can to this day.
But I think as we go through this, we are now ripping the scabs off a lot of wounds around the world, and blood is flowing in a lot of places, and people are saying, you know what, I better get treated, and to get treated, I need money.
Yes, Michael.
Charles, you come from the financial analyst sort of background. You come from markets. And financial markets, subject to regulation, appropriate regulation, have as one of their primary diseases or cancers to be cut out, insider trading.
Right.
So if you're an insider, you've got inside information, you can't use it, you can't trade on it. And what would people in markets love to have? Inside information that they could use and trade on. Now, in politics, and in the intersection between politics and the business community, they're all insiders. And they don't have insider limitations, insider trading limitations. Now, somebody like Trump comes along and says, I don't give a stuff about your insider connections. I don't give a stuff about within the Beltway who's who and who owes who what and who is going to help whose business and who is going to continue sending money, through international aid programs, etc. I just don't care about it. I'm here to represent the interests of the people in the electorate, the people who voted for me, and I will put their interests first without regard to any insider obligations. Now, to the others, to the Clintons and to the people connected with them, that is an anathema. That is Armageddon. And that is why they join collectively to fight so hard against somebody like Trump, and certainly against somebody who was saying the things that Trump said in the lead up to the election. I think that's at the heart of why the Clintons have been allowed to continue with their corrupt network right throughout the world.
I think you're right. Well, Jason, let's jump to the next page. And we only have, I think, eight more slides to go through, but some of them are kind of lengthy. This will fly through. We've shown this in the past, but for our new viewers, please understand that everything you're going to hear today is based on analysis of publicly available information, at least everything on our slides, and I think everything that Michael's sharing. It's all publicly available information. We try to provide links to it so that you can check it for yourselves, analyze it for yourselves. If you think we made a mistake, please reach out to us on Twitter if you've got comments or suggestions. We don't need to put up this playlist. We've shown it before, but Jason is the master of everything on Crowdsource the Truth, and he has organized all of our previous shows on this playlist. So if you like what you hear today, but you feel you don't have the full background, you could go back into this playlist, and in one simple place you can see a lot of information about this massive fraud. Now, the other thing I hasten to add is this is not an entertainment show. The purpose of this show is to try to help governments around the world crack this fraud open, expose it for what it is, and then work with the donors, particularly the government donors, to get their money back on behalf of the people around the world who have been defrauded by this array of crooks. So that's the purpose of these presentations. We'll now take you through in some depth. There's, at the moment, here in New York, there are multiple cyclones blowing away. First, there's outside. I don't think Jason has been out yet. It's rugged, and it might get very rugged on our East Coast. But my friend Steve Bannon has managed, I think, to step in the middle of
doo-doo.
Yeah, he's upset Donald Trump personally, the Trump family, the Trump administration. And I always make it a view that it's an unwise thing to go into a game when, let's say, you have 50 million and he has 10 billion. Probably don't want to play that game. You're not.
Does Bannon have 50 million?
That's the rumor. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So we have these cyclones going on, but I actually believe that the Trump administration, once they made the tax deal happen, That's a very good deal. The more we get into that, Michael, that is a deal in our country. We used to tax on worldwide income. Corporations used to be taxed on world. We're moving to a system in this country where you're only taxed as a corporation on your U.S. income. Meaning, I think there's probably going to be guidance that'll make it difficult to have U.S. and then operating through tax havens only. But there's an opportunity if you switch as a foreign company to becoming a U.S. company, you might dramatically enhance your tax position. So I think there's a lot of good stuff going on.
We're the same, by
Are you?
We're the same, by the way. So, yeah, absolutely. There's a hell of a lot of tax haven companies, Google, all the online type people that operate in our country, with their headquarters in God knows where, tax havens. And when we try to introduce legislation to tax them in Australia, which necessarily involves lowering the corporate tax rate, ours, by the way, is at 30-something percent, 35%. So it's crazy high. The opposition parties in Australia make it impossible for us by saying you were just handing gifts over of tax discounts to the people that actually do pay corporate rate tax in Australia. How did you overcome that in the US, or how did Trump overcome it?
We changed the legislation. I mean, it's a masterstroke. I mean, this tax bill that Trump not only got passed, but somehow managed to collude with the Democrats to get every single Democrat on the record in the House and the Senate voting against it, so that if it actually works, which I think it is already working, and it's going to work bigly, as Trump would like to say, in 2018 and beyond, it's just an amazing thing. I want to fly through this particular slide because I want to devote as much attention as possible to your work, Michael, in later slides. But just quickly, as we think about, like every time we go through this, I like to freshen up and connect with the audience and let them know what we're thinking about current events. What's going on in Iran is something that really needs to be understood, remembering how Ben Rhodes, that idiot who somehow managed to be a senior advisor in the Obama administration, bragged about how he deceived the public and deceived the politicians in getting this Iran deal across the line. What's going on now across the country of Iran, involving the great Iranian people rising up and trying to shake off a corrupt malocracy, where these people pretend that they're following God's dictates. In reality, they're taking 10% or more off the top of lots of money flowing out of Iran. We are seeing an historic set of events now, and it's time for the mainstream media to rise up, actually, and do some real journalism. It's amazing for many reasons that we don't have people at the Times, at the Wall Street Journal, at the serious newspapers, at the Sunday Times of London and elsewhere, focusing on what's really going on to the people of Iran, what's happened since 1979. Why can that great country, with a great civilization behind it, lots of culture, lots of accomplishments, why does it always seem to live under, dictators? And why can't the people get the benefits of freedom and ordered liberty that you have in Australia, that we have in America, that many countries have in Europe and Canada and elsewhere? And this is, I think, a very important moment where Donald Trump, the neophyte, is playing cards very well, I think, in Iran. Let's hope that moves forward positively.
Yep.
Very quickly, Charles, doesn't this whole Hezbollah scandal tie into the Cars International A dealership that was run by the Awan brothers, that, of course, George Webb was probably the first, or certainly among the first, to be reporting on? It's interesting to see how now this huge national news item comes back around to the citizen journalism, crowdsource, YouTube sort of way of getting, forcing attention onto the news.
Right, that's another thing. We'll probably have to do a whole separate show on it. But when you embrace unregulated globalism and open borders, what you're embracing is the potential, and I think Michael would agree with this, for fraud inside your country, international fraud, et cetera. And what really happened in 2015 and 2016, I think, and even before that, and we'll get to that later, is that the Awan brothers, this suspect Pakistani-linked, potentially ISI, their state security operation in Pakistan, linked operation, somehow managed to gain control over devices held by many senior Democrat members, including the chairman of the Democratic Party, during the campaign, and at a time when the DNC servers were indeed hacked. This group that's so concerned about security said, I don't think we'll let the FBI look at this, because that doesn't, it's not that serious.
Oh, it's even worse than that. I think when we look at the connections between former FBI agents and CrowdStrike and the involvement of CrowdStrike, you start to really see what these so-called cutouts are all about, how private corporations are used in place of government law enforcement agencies to cover obviously dangerous and illegal activity. It's pretty absurd.
Right, and then the double standard that we saw, Michael, in our country, perhaps you have the same thing. The paper of record, the New York Times, they published Trump's tax return. That's illegal.
Yeah,
You're not allowed to do that. And they did it anyway, and the idiot, Dean Baquet, I think, who's the managing editor of the Times, actually wrote a note, a letter to the public explaining why he felt he had a higher moral duty to do this. And they do that. But your friend, and I haven't met her yet, but Cheryl Atkinson, I'm her number one fan.
Number two
fan, I guess. But her great book, she talks about how the New York Times, that managing editor in particular, knew that the Clinton Foundation actually had active criminal FBI investigations in 4 FBI field offices. And yet, by August of 2016, at a pivotal moment, just around the time they released the tax returns, they spiked in the New York Times. Imagine if Donald Trump had had 4 active FBI investigations into his charity in August of 2016. Would we have read anything else in the New York Times but that? And then in addition, they sat on this story that the IRS office confirmed in July of 2016, they confirmed following Marsha Blackburn's excellent work that, that's a different one, that there was an active investigation.
Well, I just brought this up to show that CNN is very enthusiastically publishing an alert here that says that Trump has sent a cease and desist to Michael Wolff and the publisher for the bombshell-filled book. So
that's interesting. See, on that one, and I know this is a side detour here, but on that one, the excerpts that I have seen, and I knew nothing about Michael Wolff until yesterday, but when I saw the excerpt that Bannon supposedly says in a quote that, why don't you release this information to Breitbart, the thing or something more reputable, that is not a sentence that would have come out of Steve Bannon's mouth.
More legitimate.
Yeah, Steve Bannon would not have uttered those words. When I saw that, I said, now wait a minute, what is really going on here? Steve Bannon is not this stupid.
It's always a question of what actually happened, isn't it, Charles?
Yeah. So if we could just go back into the slides, because
yes.
So as we think about today, what we're going to go through with Downer and with a newspaper reporter named Maggie Haberman at the New York Times, I think you need to really understand a few things. The paper of record, which broke the story about Frank Giustra and Uranium One, late. They broke it in, I want to say, 2008 or 9 or something like that. No one yet has been able to explain to me how Frank Giustra went from being, a poor person to suddenly having enough money to get involved with a film studio, taking control of a film studio, and then by the 2000 period, early 2000 period, suddenly he's doing billion-dollar deals around the world. Nobody has been able to explain to me that rags to riches story. And nobody has been able to explain to me why exactly Bill Clinton would have visited Kazakhstan to fight HIV/AIDS. Now, no offense meant to Kazakhstan, but I've looked into the research on Kazakhstan of the population and what percentage of the population might have HIV/AIDS in 2005. I think we're talking about low hundreds of people. Why, if you're trying to fight HIV/AIDS around the world, would you say, okay, I'll ignore Brazil, where there's a big problem, and Africa, and India, and China. Why don't I go to Kazakhstan? I mean,
We had a business in Kazakhstan.
Did you?
I had a business there. When I ran the satellite business, Telstra had an investment in Kazakhstan, which I was responsible for. We had a land-earth station for satellites, so to communicate with satellites in space. And overnight, with absolutely no warning, the government of Kazakhstan nationalised it. Our asset, we owned it. We put the money in. They just came in and said, sorry, it's not yours now, it's ours. We own it. Wow. So it gives you an insight into the sort of extent of government the differences, I suppose, but the importance of having government on side. Now, I know that with Juster and Clinton, the deals that they did or that Clinton did in Kazakhstan could not have been done without corrupt officials, and this is a former Soviet country.
Right.
It simply is not possible to do business there without paying people off.
Right.
Gigantic uranium producer as well.
That's it.
Well, and no doubt there are lots of beautiful women there, perhaps, as well. But the other thing that I would just say about this, when we think about Justra, when we think about Uranium One, when we think about this informant who came forward in, I think, November of last year, who wants to tell and will be telling a tale to us of exactly what may have been going on with the FBI investigating a suspect transportation company as early as maybe around the same time, 2005, going forward, where there may have been Russian involvement, there may have been corrupt involvement, there may have been money laundering going on back in 2005. It's important to remember, Michael, you're the one who surfaced the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS tax filings for 2004 and 2005. It's important to remember that the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative was and remains a complete fraud. And, you know, who would have allowed, I mean, how does a foreign president, a former president of the United States, traipse around the world without getting some sort of coordination with our Treasury Department, the Secret Service, with our State Department? How does he go around the world pretending to be associated with a fake charity that doesn't actually exist, that doesn't have tax exemption, and no one seems to care about it in our FBI, in our Justice Department, neither from 2001 to 2005 when the fraud escalated, nor afterwards as he started gallivanting around the world with Frank Justra? That's question one. Now, question two is, how does Justra get in bed with Carlos Slim? And what is the true origin of Carlos Slim's money? How does he become wealthy the way, I think in telecom actually, Michael, so wealthy starting from scratch with nothing? What are his true origins? Who has vetted Carlos Slim? Who's ever looked at Justra and Carlos Slim and the Clintons' supposed charities? There are stories, we can hit on this link here, Jason, if you don't mind. This is a Canadian newspaper, a reputable Canadian newspaper, talking about how Justra and Slim each gave $100 million to the Clinton Foundation in 2007. That's not in any books of any Clinton Foundation, and there's no donation, certainly not two $100 million donations on top of what's declared in the books. How does the Globe and Mail in Canada, which I think is one of the more reputable newspapers in Toronto, how do they publish a story like this without checking the records? You look at the Canadian records, there's no record for an entity in 2007 this big, $200 million. There's no record in the United States of the Clinton Foundation, New York or Arkansas or any office, filing the paperwork required to control this operation. There's no record anywhere around the world of this magnitude of money. So what really happened in 2007? And by the way, isn't Carlos Slim the person who rescued the New York Times when it needed money? And might it be the case that Carlos Slim's outsized investment of risk capital at a time when the New York Times couldn't find risk capital as its advertising revenues were dwindling, could it be that the people in the newsroom in the New York Times don't really have editorial independence and couldn't go down the rabbit hole to look into the Justra thing, look into the Slim thing, and look into the Clinton Foundation? And if that's the case, maybe they should change their headline. It's not all the news that's fit to print. It's all the something else that rhymes with fit that we want to put on the internet. So if we go back into the slides, the third question is this Hunter Foundation. We've talked about the Clinton Hunter Development Initiative operating across Africa, where they say that they are venture philanthropists.
Yeah.
Which is it's a non-concept in the U.S. You cannot be a venture philanthropist.
Yeah.
I don't think in Australia you can do that, and certainly not in England.
No.
But we look here, for the first time we're going to maybe...
A leveraged philanthropy fund.
Exactly. For insider trading. So if we hit this link, Jason, if we may, the Carnegie thing.
Whoop. Sorry, hang on, I've lost my mouse.
It's all right. Those mice...
Which one?
That one. You got it. All right, this is a very interesting story for several reasons once it comes up. This is an announcement concerning Vartan Gregorian is a very famous, is actually, I think, an American success story. He is I think, of Armenian background. He came to this country and he became very successful as a renowned scholar. He's currently, I think, still president of the Carnegie, it's just up right there, of the Carnegie Corporation, which is, I think, America's oldest grant-making institution, founded by the legendary Andrew Carnegie. This fellow, and you see all his ties, he's on a board of the J. Paul Getty Trust, the Aga Khan University. He doesn't like to hang around with like people who are over there at the 23rd Street Papaya having a hot dog. He's with the Getty Trust, the Aga Khan University, Bill and Melinda Gates, etc. This is, if we look at the date of this announcement, I think it's 2004. Yeah, April 20th, 2004. Okay, now from memory, this document here, the Joint Use and Operating Agreement, that is how the Clinton Foundation Little Rock campus and massage parlor was put together in 2004, began to take shape right around the same date and was formalized on the 18th of November, 2004. So in this time frame, supposedly, the Hunter Foundation receives a commitment of 100 million pounds. Now that's an awful lot of money. In fact, at the time, I think it would be among the largest grants ever made by an individual, a living individual, to anything in England. And no one at the time seems to have done any real diligence into the Hunter Foundation. How did Tom Hunter become Sir Tom Hunter? How did somebody from Glasgow, or operating, I think, near the Glasgow region of Scotland, which is not famed as a business-friendly environment, how did that person create a sneaker fortune, sports shoes fortune? How did he do that? This is a different one.
Oh, that's not it?
Yeah. If we could go back to the slides, though. Sorry. How did he do that? Competing against Adidas, Reebok, Nike, etc. How did he do all this? Did he actually really ever give 100 million pounds to this foundation? And by the way, who is Vartan Gregorian's daughter-in-law? Vartan Gregorian's daughter-in-law is Maggie Haberman.
Wow, that's surprising.
Yeah, that's it. And Maggie Haberman, went from Politico to the New York Times sometime in 2015, I believe, early 2016, with a specific responsibility. If we could just go back into the...
You don't want to see that Hunter Foundation saving the lives.
I'm just trying to rip through the slide.
Sure.
Maggie Haberman went from Politico to the New York Times as, I think, one of the lead reporters dogging the 2016 campaign, and specifically dogging Hillary Clinton on the one hand and Donald Trump on the other. How do you, as the Times, if there's supposed to be a code of ethics here, isn't that an obvious conflict of interest? You have a reporter whose father-in-law is the lead outside director for, I think, a highly suspicious foundation engaged in very suspicious activities across Africa, venture philanthropy, with the Clintons that are unregulated, that are the subject of great concern in the Podesta WikiLeaks emails. There are many, many emails where even the Podesta team is saying, maybe we shouldn't get so close to these Hunter people. I mean, they're doing these dodgy things, investing in companies across Africa and saying that that's actually philanthropy, and then doing it in places like Rwanda and I think Tanzania and elsewhere. So there's some really big questions to think about as we now take you through some ancient history that is coming back to the fore here, involving Australia and Maggie Haberman and the Clinton Foundation.
Just real briefly, the reason I wanted to show that was that the Hunter Foundation said it was dedicated to helping the lives of young women. And we know that these organizations that seem to help young women in some of these more challenging areas of the world have maybe a sort of a strange idea of help.
Right. So at this moment, the one final point I would make, and Roger Stone has a piece that's featured in, I think, Zero Hedge today, talking about, that Donald Trump does indeed pose a big threat. The deep state thought they were going to take him out with the Russian collusion thing. That's about, I think, if that isn't completely discredited yet, it's close to being discredited. They thought they'd maybe try to remove him for being mentally unstable. I think that's absurd. I mean, talk about mental instability. I mean, Hillary Clinton, the leading candidate. I mean, how well did she do at the 9/11 thing, right? So Donald Trump, I think, does pose an existential threat to the practices that we've seen evolve, at least in my adult business career, from say 1988, 89 forward, where the U.S. And other large economies rushed to embrace the notion of globalism, thinking that we would instill our morals, our system of laws and ethics on the rest of the corrupt world. And in reality, I think what's happening actually is that corruption is so endemic and so prevalent around the world, and it was like an easy sell to some of these corrupt politicians anyway, that what we have here is corruption on a massive scale that was flagged by Donald Trump and is not yet noticed enough executive order dated December 21st, 2017, that I think is already starting to bite and scare the deep state around the world. So if we go to the next. All right. So what has happened, Michael, in our country, and I don't know how closely you've been following this, Maggie Haberman and the New York Times and Alexander Downer are now floating this theory that it was through drunken discussions in May of 2016 that this lightweight George Papadopoulos, and don't ask me how he ended up having drinks in a wine bar with Alexander Downer. I mean, just very unlikely. I don't even want to...
No, not if you know Alexander Downer. That's not.
All right. But now what they're trying to do is, with the Christopher Steele dossier under intense focus, as likely being, just fiction, the Democrats, using the New York Times, using Downer, suddenly come back and said, oh, actually, the Australian government knew about this, and we alerted America to the problem, and there really was a need around May 2016 for people to be concerned that that Trump was colluding with the Russians. I think we really need. We're not going to see the New York Times do any real work here because they're so utterly conflicted and will be so discredited by the truth once it comes out. But citizen journalists like you, Mike, like Jason, and others around the world, we need to dig in here and really see Mr. Downer for what he is.
Downer's conflict of interest, his unstated conflict of interest in this, should disqualify him as any sort of credible, independent person without an axe to grind. He's a huge axe to grind because he's the fellow who initiated the major contracts between Australia and the Clinton Foundation in 2006. He's the bloke who didn't do the due diligence. He's the fellow who accepted at face value Clinton's assertions that he was able to sign for on behalf of the Clinton Foundation and the CHAI. He is the fellow who didn't even run the single test that would have disqualified CHAI immediately, and that was that a charity in the United States is not permitted to distribute pharmaceuticals. Simple as that. Not able, cannot. It's an absolute exemption from a charitable purpose.
Say again, Michael, they're not allowed to distribute pharmaceuticals? Is that what you said?
That's exactly what I said.
Yeah.
There is an explicit exemption for charitable institutions claiming to operate as a charity if they make money from distributing pharmaceuticals. And that's precisely the business plan for CHAI. It said, this isn't a charity, this is about us distributing pharmaceuticals, by the way, with some of the dodgiest characters that you could imagine in the world, like Ranbaxy from India, companies that would purport to manufacture and distribute pharmaceuticals that met a standard, but which in fact didn't, and they would knowingly put corrupting compounds into their so-called tablets, knowingly do it, and knowingly distribute those pharmaceuticals to poor people who thought that they were getting the real thing, and all of this courtesy of the Clinton Foundation, engaging in an activity that it was just explicitly exempt from. It's like a mobile phone company saying, okay, well, we're going to start running a mobile phone network. We don't have any licenses to do it. We're not licensed to use the spectrum, but we don't care. We're going to do it anyway. How long would they last in the corporate world? Well, they wouldn't. They'd be gone in 20 minutes. Clinton did precisely that in the charitable world, and it was as difficult as I've just explained to discover it. It was as simple as, bang, click your fingers, have a look at the US charity regulations, and it's just there in black and white. You can't run a pharmaceutical distribution business. The second point in relation to Downer and the Clinton HIV/AIDS initiative is that it was deregistered by the corporate authorities in Massachusetts for failure to file financial reports in consecutive years. How much due diligence does that take to work out whether or not a corporate entity is extant or is not? And it wasn't. It didn't exist. It had been wound up for its failure to file the required financial reports. And why do you think it might not have filed? Duh. How hard is that to work out? Because it was running a corrupt business. And Downer and his department didn't do the slightest bit of due diligence. They continued to contract with them, continued to send them money. Down the track, Downer pops up as the man who says, you know what? I've heard a rumour from a bloke who's heard a rumour from a bloke that Trump is involved with the Russians with this, and they've got an email dossier on Hillary Clinton, my very good friend Hillary, loving wife of Bill Bikini Clinton. Hillary Bikini Girl Clinton, by the way, is my mate. And nobody discloses that. Nobody points the finger at Downer. Everybody says, oh, isn't this like credible? Jeez, fair dinkum.
Yeah.
Sit back for a second, think about it.
Well, we're going to get into that even more in depth in a few minutes. But just quickly, though, focusing a little bit on the American election, Hillary Clinton, there's a Politico report in here, late in December 2014, that Hillary Clinton was very close to forming an exploratory committee by that moment in time. We've been over in past presentations. They stalled and obstructed the process of turning over they never turned over all of the missing federal records that were in the possession of Hillary Clinton and her entourage, but they turned over some of the records on the 5th of December 2014. Now, Michael, I don't know how much you focused on this, but in our press, we have said multiple times that the Clintons, their surrogates, Podesta, all these campaign people repeated time and time again that there was never an investigation into Hillary Clinton, into her emails. It was part of a normal security review, and that's all it was. There was nothing to see here. Move along, forget about it. In fact, we learned through this FBI vault file dump, and we've provided 3 different links to it here. We learned there's 16 different long files. I think there are actually over 6,000 pages in the file, but they've only released several low thousands. We learn in dump, let's think, we learned there's 16 dumps, that there was in fact an investigation into the mishandling of classified information. This is on dump 1, page 1, you'll see it for yourselves. Then in dump 6, we learned that in January, February 2016, we went through that. You don't need to pull the, okay. I'm just saying because for time.
Sure.
But I do need to look back at the slides.
Sorry.
In January, February 2016, we learned that a senior State Department person was dissatisfied with the length of time it was taking the FBI to move its investigation into the mishandling of classified information by Hillary Clinton, by Uma Abedin, by her colleagues. This senior State Department person was so upset, they first mailed information into James Comey, who didn't respond and the office wouldn't acknowledge. So this guy walks in and says, listen, we need to go into the highest level facility, which is called a secure compartmentalized information facility. I have a high security clearance. You need to find somebody in the FBI who can listen to me. We need to go into a SCIF, and I need to tell you what is happening. This is in February of 2016, as it could have been possible for Bernie Sanders, had he cared about the emails, to maybe beat Hillary Clinton. So this actually did happen. It's in there where I say on pages 11 and 12 in dump 6 of 16, and we provide a link to that actual dump. And then we also learn in that same thing, page 53 and 54, that lots and lots of emails were actually found that were classified. It wasn't like 1 or 2. And as Donald Trump has tweeted out earlier in the last week or so, when some, lower rated sailor sent some pictures inside, I think, a submarine, nuclear sub, he's in prison for a few pictures, a few selfies to his wife or something like that. And, Hillary and Uma, and we can get to Uma in a second, but Hillary and Uma and the Klan, they're just sending everything.
And you know what? It's been very generously categorized as, you know, a mistake, a mishandling. It seems quite deliberate. The fact that they identified that Yahoo could be hacked, possibly. She sends them to Yahoo. There's this big Russian hack. Well, right. That's what I mean. I propose that they intended to hack Yahoo, and so Huma sent it to Yahoo to hide it in a system-wide hack. That one email could have been the whole purpose of the Yahoo hack.
That's a smart idea. So the truth, Michael, is that the Clinton campaign took over work that previously had been done for trying to find dirt on Donald Trump and his people, the so-called Steele dossier. They took that work over in May of 2016, conveniently right around the same time that Downer and Georgie Boy were having too much wine in some London wine bar. Right? So if we go to the next page, I think there's a bleed over here. We asked the question, do Downer and Haberman and many others have serious conflicts of interest here? Conflicts of interest which might involve criminal activity, it might involve civil exposure. Those are serious questions. Briefly, Michael, yes. You'll know all this, but our viewers here don't really understand how you might compare the size of Australia with the size of the United States in economic and certain other terms. So I just want to fly through this. Your population is, I think, 7% the size of ours.
It's a little more than that now. It's about 25.
Yeah, this is from 2015.
About 25 million now.
This is from 2015. Okay. All these figures are the latest comparable ones on some of these metrics. And you're growing faster than we are. Your median age is a bit higher. Your consumption, interestingly, per person is much higher than, let's say, South Korea, the country we covered last week, or on last Sunday. And you have a large internal market. You're not as dependent on exports as a country like China or India or South Korea might be. One of my personal theses is that the United States has been rich for a long time. We've invested a lot of money, perhaps too much money, in infrastructure. Some of it needs to be torn down, others needs to be rebuilt. But having had so much money invested here, we don't need to reinvest quite as much money as a country like Australia with few people over a large territory might need to do. So I would argue you have a scale disadvantage in the way that you're organized. You have a scale advantage in that your population is concentrated in these cities. You have more doctors per 100,000 than we do, substantially more hospital beds. Yeah. I wonder about that. Does that mean we're under-resourced? Does that mean you're over-resourced? And on the next, we can fly to the next
Well,
page.
you know, Charles, we are a nanny state. We are a increasingly socialist place, and increasingly a place that relies on government to provide for some of the things that normally would have been taken into people's own hands. So the medical ratios that you've reported there are no surprise at all. And the consumption, it's a consumption economy. That's a bit scary, actually, for us, because we're going to end up taking in each other's washing and,
right.
you know, doing back massages or something without the export markets when our exports fall over even further because of what Trump's doing, bringing manufacturing back into the United States. We've been very fortunate because we're a great big mine, we're a quarry. So we have been exporting hand over fist, particularly coal, thermal coal, and iron ore to China. As China manufacturing ramps down and US manufacturing ramps up, we are very, very highly exposed. And
right.
You'll see huge deficit, huge continuing fiscal deficit that the federal government has, very, very large overall debt. Personal debt levels are huge, and government debt levels are huge as well, with this sort of socialist lefty leaning, you know, Clinton Foundation oriented, if you want, in both sides of politics in Australia. We're highly, highly exposed. It's the only observation I'd make on your chart.
Great. Well, so Michael, here's some new information for you, maybe. You've pointed out before that on, I believe it was in December, around December 31st, 2009, the Clinton Foundation, when Barack Obama was president, when his administration was fully seated, his people were in all the chairs at the IRS, Justice, etc. On December 31st, 2009, or thereabouts, a new organization called Clinton Health Access Initiative submitted an application to the IRS under strict penalties of perjury, wherein it said that this entity, this Clinton Health Access Initiative with the same acronym as the old one, CHI, was not a successor to any previous activity. All right, an obvious, bold-faced lie. This is just with respect to your country, Australia. Some of the press releases that explain the evolution, the supposed evolution of the Clinton Foundation's illegal HIV/AIDS operation from 2003 forward. Now, for those of you who may have a connection at Fox, it's important to understand that in 2003, the communications head for the Clinton Foundation was a gentleman who stayed there, I think, through at least 2005. I may have that wrong. It may, but certainly 2003, 4, I think 5, maybe even 6, is a gentleman who is the top communications person for the print division of Fox now. Okay, he was in the center of all of this, communicating around the world, trumpeting the great successes of the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative, which never legally existed. You see, we put this first press release up before, this October 2003 press release. You know, people have seen it before, but basically what it does is it lists out institution after institution, bragging about, this is, well, you don't have to give now, you just have to. October 23rd, 2003, a press release issued from New York talking about this initiative. It didn't exist. There was no legal form called the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative. There was no authority in October 23, 2003 to do any of this work. Yet this press release, which is still up there while the Clinton Foundation solicits money, brags about all that work. And then I found this, Michael, the second one here. In 2004, your government is listed as cooperating with WHO and the Clinton Foundation to do various work around the world. And that's it. Yeah, last broadcast we talked all about Korea. This is a lengthy thing. People could read it at their leisure, but this is a lengthy document that goes into the degree to which your government was working with the William J. Clinton Foundation and other organizations, the WHO, around the world, in theory, fighting HIV/AIDS in 2004 and 2005. I mean, how come, I mean, in Australia, does nobody keep records in the government of, you know, what you're supposed to be doing?
It's worse. No, it's worse. It's worse than that. Does nobody keep records? What they did, what the Australian government did, is backdated and changed the public utterances that said we had contracted with the Clinton HIV/AIDS initiative. They whitewashed that, and the person responsible for it is the current Foreign Minister, Julie Bishop. They whitewashed it and changed the contracting party's name from Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative to Clinton Health Access Initiative, helping the Clintons to pretend that the HIV/AIDS Initiative had never existed. Can you imagine that? A government complicit in that sort of fraud.
Well, did they whitewash it or bleach bit it?
Or bleach, there you go. And I don't know, if you put that bleach around and stick it in the garage, it might cause a fire at your house sometime down the track.
Bleach bit caused the fire. That's great.
Go. So it was trying to smoke some bleach bit. But anyway, we put up here a series of the press releases. We don't need to pull them up now, but people can look at them. You know, prima facie evidence, your government, you know, announcing to the public in documents that are still out there circulating in the public domain that your government did indeed work with the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative at a time when there was no Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative.
You know, there was a very interesting... Sorry, Michael.
I was just going to say, and from our perspective, more painfully, sent them money, heaps, tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars, which they treated as donations.
Right. Well, they were donations.
There was an interesting comment from YouTube that was asking if you think it's possible, if either of you gentlemen think it's possible, that the U.S. government is trying to cover this up because they feel other countries might want to go to war with the United States over this. I don't think we have any indication of that.
I don't think that there are many countries other than, you know, Rocket Man thinking about, you know, launching a war against the United States. That would be most unwise.
Yeah.
We just keep going here into the next page. I think there's one more bar. Yeah. In Australia, it kept expanding and expanding. Well, let's move this up. Yeah, all right. So, Michael, this is where we would like to really concentrate on your excellent work, and maybe you could lead us through this. But what we did is we tried to organize some of the many stories that you've done, and we want to give our viewers the benefit of the kind of work you do, where you don't just mouth off. You provide hard evidence that people can check for themselves. So, the floor is yours. Can you see this?
The first of those, Bill Clinton and Australian officials in CHI $1 million fraud and cover-up. Is that the one?
Well, it says a real investigative journalist from Australia shames mainstream press.
Got it.
And Clinton Foundation never validly registered anyway. Whichever one of these.
Page 7.
Yep, got it.
I was.
Yeah, well, that's all. Sorry, Charles, you go.
Yeah, I was just very impressed with your work, and wherever you'd care to start, we can just take one or more of these links and just sort of talk about them.
Well, if you take that first one, so you click on the first, and it should bring you to a page that says Bill Clinton and Australian officials in CHA a multi-million-dollar fraud and cover-up. It just draws from what is available on the website from the Clinton Foundation. So that tells you about the CHAI acronym. The fact that our government doesn't like to be reminded about the predecessor organisation, and the fact that the Clinton Health Access Initiative, it's staring you in the face that it's trying to pass itself off as being the CHAI of all history, which it's not. There was an entity that was actually registered unlawfully, but I mean, it was registered in Arkansas, the Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative, and it contracted with the Australian government, and we sent it tens of millions of dollars, and it was like a carpetbagger, a shyster from Eastern Europe on the internet or something, in the ease with which you can discover that it was a fraud, that it was fraudulent, and that it was succeeded or replaced or passed off, with something that passed itself off as a CHAI with this fresh corporate structure. I mean, why would you have to put in place a fresh corporate structure? Why would you have to do that? Isn't it obvious that you would ask that question?
Well,
hey, darling, we're getting bills at home from a company that calls itself CHAI, and I look at the asterisk and look at the fine print, darling. It's now changed its name to something else, but the initials are still CHAI, and we've got this whole contract with them. Should we be paying that bill, or do you think this might be somebody trying to fleece us? And it's that easy. And the Australian government, because they are because individuals in important places in the government are so beholden to the Clintons, or so they'd find it difficult to confront them and say, "Hey, Bill, are you full of bullshit or what?"
Well,
they just never do it. They got the photo on the wall. Oh, this is me with Bill Clinton. He is really famous.
That's true.
And I was with him, and check it out. There's my photo. And by the way, everybody that's done business with Bill Clinton before and with Hillary gets a really good job. And I want a really good job when I leave this current ministerial office, because things aren't looking really good in the polls at present. And I'm likely to get the flick from the electorate. So I've got to have a think, about my future career. Alex Downer, he was that guy from Central Casting. And so is Julie Bishop, the person who's currently in the celebrity-chasing foreign minister role for Australia. And they find themselves doing deals like this, where Bill says, "Psst, can I ask a favour? CHAI number 1 is looking a bit dodgy. Just a couple of technicalities, no real great drama, but could we just change that but leave the acronym in place? There'll be a different corporate structure underlying it. And could you just honour all the contracts that we've got?" Yeah, no worries, Bill. No drama. We'll be out with that.
Well, let me
ask. What is wrong with these people?
Let me ask you a question. If you could put your police hat back on, I would have thought that when you come talking to the government of Australia inside Australia, and you solicit money inside the physical confines of Australia, say perhaps using the mail in Australia or telephone or facsimile or the internet, that there might be a law in Australia that says you actually have to have a valid corporate existence inside Australia, and it's possible that you might have to register as a charity inside Australia.
Oh no, simpler. It's simpler. It's simpler, Charles. The offence of fraud or obtaining a financial advantage or theft by deception is pretty easy to prove. And in the case of Clinton, it's a lay-down misere that the guy obtained money, he thieved money by deception. Now, what's the deception? The deception, because you've got to describe the deception and you've got to describe the dishonesty. It's called a point of proof to prove the offence. So in the case of theft by deception, you've got to prove identity. Who's the person who did it? Well, it's Bill Clinton. He's pretty obvious because you've got photos of him doing it, signing the contracts. The dishonesty. Okay, what's his dishonesty? He dishonestly held himself out as a manager or trustee or director or representative of two entities, the Clinton Foundation and the Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative. Now, at the time, by virtue of his perjury and by virtue of the findings, court findings in the United States, he was disbarred as a lawyer, and he's a class of person who is explicitly excluded from the class of persons able to act as trustees, directors or managers of a US charity. So he couldn't hold himself out as being capable of executing the agreements that triggered payments from the Australian government. So he obtained money, which is property. He obtained money, that's the theft, by deception. What's the deception? He deceived us into believing that he was a representative of this charitable institution. And what's his dishonesty? Well, it's clear. It was dishonest. He signed documents that said, I am this bloke who is signing for the Clinton Foundation, and he wasn't capable of doing it. That's as hard as it is to prove. If I was the prosecutor, I'd just hold up that MOU and say, here's his signature, here's a photo of him signing it, here's a video of the proceedings, here's interviews that he did, and here's the money, here's the contracts. He's got the money and taken it out of Australia. I'll say to the jury, there's nothing really to add. If you've got any questions you want to ask, because I don't. You're a crook, Bill. You're a fraudster.
Is there any statute of limitations in Australia?
None. No, not for serious indictable offences, and this is a serious indictable offence. He could be looking at a 10-year jail term just for that.
What about other? Now, would there be in Clinton, in the case of the Clinton charity?
There could be more in New Guinea. I mean, that's just one document that Bill came here and signed. In New Guinea, with Ruby, God love her, Ruby Shang, she found time out from the Caterpillar dealership, hiring out earth-moving equipment in Vietnam, to go over at Bill's behest to Papua New Guinea and to register a corporate entity in Papua New Guinea right at the time that the money was starting to flow from Australia, called the CHAI, Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative Association Incorporated. Now, the legislation under which he registered that entity in Papua New Guinea provides for the incorporation of associations which are a low level of corporate scrutiny, and explicitly, it's in the legislation in PNG that they're to be for charitable and benevolent purposes like lawn bowls or badminton or the kids' judo, kids' soccer teams, that sort of stuff. Community benefit entities, it's not for corporate entities. That they should be proprietary companies. They should be limited by guarantee or limited by shareholder funds. So she goes to Papua New Guinea, and one thing that the legislation in Papua New Guinea provides for is that once you advertise your intention to incorporate an existing association, so it's got to exist, which it didn't. Once you advertise your intention to incorporate it, you've got to wait 30 days. It's black and white. It's in the legislation. That's so potential creditors can object to your incorporation if they want to go after the persons in the existing association after their personal assets, right? So it's to protect creditors of the existing entity. Now, this entity was incorporated the next day. That is corrupt, clearly corrupt. The commissioner in Papua New Guinea doesn't have the ability to incorporate the Clinton HIV/AIDS initiative for Ruby Shang, the Caterpillar dealer from Vietnam. He doesn't have the ability to do it, but he did do it overnight. And the Clintons and their people in Arkansas were involved because they sent the paperwork over. They sent the Articles of Association for the Clinton Foundation, because they had to have rules for this association in PNG. Nobody bothered to draft them up. They didn't meet the corporate requirements in Papua New Guinea. They just sent the Articles of Association of the existing Clinton Foundation in Arkansas to PNG. It got stamped. The 30-day period wasn't complied with. It got incorporated the next day, so the money could be paid to Ruby before she had to fly out to sell more Caterpillar earth movers.
But importantly, actually, Michael, didn't they send the Articles of Incorporation for the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative, Inc. in 2006 to Papua New Guinea, failing
Yes.
to mention that that entity had been liquidated on December 31st, 2005. I think, right?
Yeah.
The Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative Papua New Guinea was supposedly a subsidiary of an entity that had, in fact, according to the Arkansas papers, been liquidated on December 31st, 2005. I mean, that's really egregious fraud. Thinking that nobody's going to check.
It's an egregious fraud, and the heavy lifting, the labour required to discover it, about 6 mouse clicks. So you need Google and you need a pair of fingers that can type in, and 6 mouse clicks away, bang, 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 bang. Thank you very much. There it is, the proof that this was incorporated fraudulently for the purpose of fleecing Australian taxpayers. And who's behind it? Bill Clinton and his missus.
Well, look, and Downer.
It is infuriating. And Alexander Downer.
Yeah, how could Alexander Downer not know this? How could you not know this?
Well, in fairness...
I tell you what, mate, they explicitly do know it now. They have explicitly known it for the past 18 months because I drew it to the current administration's attention. I wrote in chapter and verse, as you'll see in some of the links that you've provided there, in chapter and verse with exquisite precision and detail about what had gone on, the times, the dates, the places, the false certificates, the names, etc., etc., etc. And I received the standard reply. All Australian government contracts have KPIs and goals and milestones, and this was signed with Bill Clinton in his capacity as founder, if you don't mind, of the Clinton Foundation on the 22nd of February 2006. What is wrong with them? Like, who do they think we are? Bloody idiots.
Well, in fairness, they may have been preoccupied reclassifying lawn balls as a malady that outback landscapers need to be cautious of.
Yeah. The crock of shit.
Sorry.
So, but let me ask you this, Michael. In Australia, I assume there is a William J. Clinton Foundation or a Bill, Hillary, and Chelsea Clinton Foundation in Australia that must have, I would guess, at least one Australian trustee or director.
There is. Yeah, there is. And I tell you what, mate, it was domiciled in an office in the city of Melbourne. And the city of Melbourne had a lefty-greeny, like the council, right? Had a lefty-greeny sort of administration, and it was one of the founders of the Green Cities or some other climate change bazaar that Clinton had running. And they gave office space for the purpose of registering the Clinton entities in Australia for further and better billing purposes.
Wow.
Or for access to money to get it out of the country. And these bank accounts for the Clinton Foundation in Australia is a relatively transparent place so far as regulation is concerned and stuff, but I haven't seen that aggregated into reports in the Clinton Foundation tax filings in the United States. And in other administrations, other places like, Africa, Burundi and Marawi and God knows where, I'm misquoting the names, but you get the idea. In places, busted backside tin pot places where there's absolutely no sort of banking oversight, they could be putting whatever they want into bank accounts and then doing whatever they want with the money, and no one would ever be the wiser.
Exactly. Which is, it's amazing to me as somebody who spent principally most of his time in the financial and investing world, and as somebody who's hired and fired many accountants for many projects around the world. It's just amazing to me that they would procure one supposed fake audit, let alone all the ones that we know about from 2001 forward, including the most recent one that was just filed on November, I think, 16th or so, 2017. It's just amazing to me that this Clinton Foundation would have the nerve to even pretend that they could get audited. And it's amazing further that they would now try, with all the tax uncertainties, the likelihood that governments around the world are, if Australia doesn't want its money back, that just means there's more money for Norway and Sweden and the UK and France and others to get.
Hey, Charles, go easy on that. Australia doesn't want its money back. Certain Australian politicians are very keen to avoid this becoming a question, but Australians want their bloody money back. Let me tell you that with absolute rock-solid certainty. Your average Australian, I have a yarn to people in the pub about this, and say, listen, mate, what do you think about this? You just run through the stuff that we've been talking about quickly. Do you reckon we should get our money back? They look at you like, what's the question again? You reckon we should? Yeah, a lot.
Something
Australians want their
interesting.
money back.
Something interesting that I just discovered while we're talking, and also joking aside, we're really seeing essentially a franchise crime syndicate that's just, you know, popping up new franchises around the world. When I put into Google Earth, Clinton Foundation, Melbourne, Australia, it took me to Chai Color Me Hairdressing. How would it do that?
I don't know.
Weird, very weird.
Just can I just emphasise that point about Australians wanting their money back, Charles,
Yeah.
and why we might want our money back? Well, following on in New Guinea, New Guinea's got Sir Michael Somare as the Prime Minister, a corrupt kleptocrat, you know, stuffing Australian aid money, which is, I mean, it's an aid economy. Face the facts in New Guinea. They're a mendicant, aid-based economy. Stuffing his pockets with Australian aid money. Along comes Bill Clinton. Bill says, let's get together and build the Pacific Medical Institute, a huge hospital in Papua New Guinea, way out of proportion to the Papua New Guinean needs. Somare into the budget, the Papua New Guinea budget, about $25 million as initial sort of seed money. And then Bill organises for Somare to get a private jet from, when I say get a private jet, I mean lease it, have his own private jet from where? Bill Clinton International Airport in Little Rock, out it flies from one of the dealers. Somare is going back and forth to New York. He goes to the Clinton Global Initiative. He's feted as the great star there. He talks about the economy of the future, which Papua New Guinea will lead. Do you mind? The global economy of the future being led by Papua New Guinea. Bill Clinton's patting him on the back going, this bloke's a genius. Feeding him. Listen to Sir Michael Somare. He makes Bill Clinton a Grand Chief of the Order of the Loggerhue. So Bill's got his feathery headdress on, and the 25 million initial money for this great institute suddenly disappears because it was just, what do they call it? Facilitation money. That's right, facilitation money. And Hillary was timed to come out. She's Secretary of State at this time. I have a range of emails because Clinton will submit to the State Department any indication of potential conflicts of interest for the Secretary. And then an ethics department within the State Department would go through it and say, yeah, you can do this speech or you can't do that deal, you can't pursue this initiative, you can pursue that one, blah, 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 blah. So Hillary's lined up to go to Papua New Guinea. There's all sorts of Chinese influence and Chinese money in Papua New Guinea and many reasons for the United States to feel uneasy about it. That is as far as I have got with redactions from State Department emails, but Hillary cancelled going to Papua New Guinea. The deal with the Pacific Hospital, suddenly overnight, was cancelled. Bill goes very quiet on it. And you should read the local press reports about this stinking deal, festering, smelly, stinking $25 million in facilitation payments, and Somare with his private jet back and forth to New York, and Bill patting him on the back with his feathery headdress as the chief of the Order of the Loggerhue, all the while billing Australia for work in Papua New Guinea that he was also billing Unitaid for. I didn't work. So Australia's paying for exactly the same thing that Bill is submitting in invoices to Unitaid. It boggles the mind that this stuff's so easy to discover. It is so crystal clear, and the evidence supporting the allegations that I've just made is so, unequivocal. It boggles the mind that it is not being pursued, and that's where we come in, I suppose.
Good. Well, let's go to the next slide, Jason, because readers can look at each of these stories that themselves are very lengthy. We talked, you covered, I think, most of this actually. This is, again, mostly Michael's excellent work here that people could go and read at their, if you want to pick any one of these stories, I don't know if you can see them, Michael, we can pull one of them up.
Yeah. Well, that second one, to facilitate the Clinton Foundation's access to Asia, that was one of the KPIs that
which one is this
our
one?
government agreed. We pay him, the second one that you've got there.
This one?
The sort of history of Australia's deals to facilitate the Clinton Foundation's access to Asia.
Oh, that's a different
That was one of the deliverables. That's what we paid the Clinton Foundation for. We paid them to facilitate their access to Asia, where Ruby Shang, the Caterpillar dealer, would be the front person. Oh, God in heaven.
Which page is this?
The second of those, on page 6.
6.
Yeah, we've got Michael Smith, Shane's Mainstream Press.
No, this page next. Shane, second of these. Australia extends its support?
Anyway, like you said.
Yeah, that one. There we go. We got it.
Yep, that's it. The second of. I just went to the second because I thought that's what we were up to. We may well have gone much further than that.
We're there.
We got it.
So yeah, that was one of the KPIs for us to pay to facilitate the Clinton Foundation's access to Asia. And what did it do after we'd facilitated that? Well, brought Ranbaxy drugs that didn't work. And I think you've covered this in the past, but $500 million to settle a US Department of Justice criminal complaint is a lot of money. And you couldn't find shonkier, more dishonest, uncaring, contemptuous individuals than the Singh brothers, the Indian brothers who set up Ranbaxy and continued its operations with these manifestly corrupted, pretend pharmaceuticals. And Clinton knew it. He saw the World Health Organization findings in relation to Ranbaxy and still went back and heaped praise on them. That, to me, the other stuff is just financial. But the fact that we spent money buying pharmaceuticals that we knew to be corrupted, that didn't work, and then tried to cover it up and not hold to account the people who made that happen, takes this whole Clinton stuff to another level where it's not just financial, where it's not just greedy people lining their pockets. It's people who are prepared to say to somebody who's suffering from HIV or AIDS, I don't actually care that the drugs that you're receiving, I don't really care whether they work or not. You might die as a result of this, where if we'd been more diligent and given you things that actually did work, you wouldn't, and I just don't care about it. In fact, so little is the extent of my care, in Clinton's case, that I'm going to praise the people who knowingly ran that Ranbaxy business. I'm going to praise them and say that they were doing a great job. Well, doesn't that turn your stomach?
Well, as you were saying earlier, it crosses a line. But actually, it's when we were first talking about this many months ago, I had not seen the Podesta WikiLeaks cables. And now as I think about it, there are quite a few in there that talk about how Ira Magaziner was upset with Bill Clinton for describing Chai in a certain way that threatened to undercut the sort of the silent arrangement they had with the main branded drug companies. The idea being, the dirty deal is not simply this, that we're going to distribute adulterated drugs in poor countries. The dirty deal is that the branded companies will let us do this in exchange for not making an issue of the high price of HIV/AIDS drugs inside the United States of America. That's there are many layers to this scandal.
Yeah,
we in this country, in America and in Australia, perhaps we can afford the very high cost of these branded drugs. It's many times, or it was historically many times, the generics. But to do that type of a deal, that type of a cynical deal, where in this country, siding with Bernie Sanders for a second, which is, maybe I'm losing my mind here.
All right,
I may not be. With his lambasting of the branded drug companies. I mean, it seems to me that if we can get the price of medicine down, we should try to do that. And just because in this country we can borrow a lot of money to waste money on explosively high healthcare costs, doesn't mean we should do it, doesn't mean we shouldn't care about getting the prices of these drugs. And that's even worse, that you would do this deal, allow the fat cat drug companies to make tons of money off horribly afflicted people.
Yeah.
And then do it in a dirty side deal where you say it's okay if you mess around outside this country, let the generics people have let them try to make money getting HIV/AIDS medicine into the hinterland of Papua New Guinea. They'll do that. We'll stay here in America.
I would go just one step further and say to describe it as not caring about the people implies a kind of an apathy that I don't agree is there. It's an active, they're taking advantage of the plight of these people to kill them.
Yeah. And this is, we're not talking here, we're talking about people who hold themselves out. I mean, how many benefits have there been in Australia and America, across Europe, where you get Elton John and, these various celebrities in Los Angeles and New York talking about the plight of HIV/AIDS sufferers, and Bill Clinton getting honorary awards for his great service, and Hillary bragging about it, with these celebrities who, when they're not busy raping people, are out partying. I mean, it's just, it really is disgusting. And I think, for me, across the line, one of the reasons I decided to go on this crusade was when I saw this Ranbaxy story. I realized, my God, the disconnect between what they were actually doing, what was actually happening, and what they were claiming was happening is so large that we really need to expose them for the criminal fraudsters extraordinaire that they are, and they need to find justice.
And we cannot overstate the fact that it's being specifically done to deceive the general public, because so many people that I speak to on the streets when I go out and do my interviews and things like that really still think that the Clinton Foundation is helping fight HIV. They don't know that it's a horrendous campaign to kill the underprivileged people around the world and make money doing it.
Well, if we go back into, I think we were actually through the whole Papua New Guinea story, through the next page. We've talked, unless there's one here on the, Michael, on laying more waste in Papua New Guinea. I don't know if there's any one of these stories that you might want to...
Look, guys, I'm conscious of the time. It's, an hour and a half into it, and in Australia it's 3:30 in the morning. No, I don't. You keep going, but my... bladder at some point is going to give out, and I have to call it.
And I'll try to be quick. The road ahead. All right. So really, the question that I think really is before the general audience is, which is going to be the first government to act? Will it be the American government? The federal government? Will it be U.S. state governments? Will it be foreign governments that are going to say, you know what, enough is enough. We've now seen enough. In the case, for example, of the government of France, I have been asked by my good friend, and you guys will get to meet him eventually, Fabien Chalandon, to mention that Fabien is somebody I've done business with since 1985. He's a man of great reputation, fierce intellect, very stuck into the details here. He is the one who alerted me to the fact that the largest known donor to the Clinton Foundation is actually the government of France through Unitaid. The government of France began to investigate the Clinton Foundation and Unitaid seriously in 2009, December. They issued one report in 2010 and another in 2011, but both of those reports seem to have missed the truth. Will it be the government of France that moves faster than the government of the United States? Or will the government of the United Kingdom, which is also an important donor, or Sweden, or Norway, or your country, Australia? Or will it be one of the recipient countries, one of the African countries, South Africa, for example, or Tanzania, or Kenya?
Do they have the reach to actually be effective in prosecuting anything like that?
Well, I think this is going to be a question of getting the public to focus on it. So we do have this organization, the UN. It might have a smaller budget than it used to have, but we still do have the UN. It does operate here in New York City. Most of these countries do have consulates or offices or whatever in the United States, particularly in New York. I'm available to talk to any of these people in New York. So the real question is, which government's going to unlock the truth first? Now,
Can I give you a view on that, gents?
Sorry?
I doubt it's going to be one of the donor recipient countries, because they are dependent on foreign aid, and they view the Clinton Foundation as being a part of the foreign aid cartel or collective. And from Australia's perspective, it's unlikely to be us, because the complicity of people like Downer, etc. And as an overarching comment, looking at it from afar, I would say the person most likely, the person most vociferous in his criticism of Clinton is Trump. And he said in the lead up to the election in the United States, and he was elected clearly with this mandate, he said, because if I was in office, Hillary, you'd be in jail. Yeah. He was unequivocal about it. He tweets regularly about the extent of the criminality in the Clinton Foundation, and yet he has not been able within his administration to bring any proceedings against them or have an effective investigation. In fact, the only investigations that have been set up under his auspices are into himself. And we are amazed, as observers from afar, we are amazed at the administration, at the Trump administration, and it's this open question of why would you be so critical? Why would you say there is a problem? Why would you describe its extent as you have done, and yet do nothing about it? So if you're not going to do anything about it, neither are we. We're just going to say, well, we'd be pretty silly to bring these people to account if in their own country, their own chief critic, who happens to be the president, isn't doing anything about it.
That's a good point. Well, last night, so early in the morning, your time, late last night, this Congressman Nunes from California and the current Deputy Attorney General, and I say current because I hope he won't be there much longer, Rod Rosenstein, apparently did reach a deal wherein documents that have been withheld from Congress and from the public concerning the FBI and the Department of Justice and their role in the potential election 2015, 2016, and maybe even into the earlier period of the uranium scandal going all the way back to 2004. Those documents are going to be made public imminently. So we'll clearly there's something in there that people didn't want us to see. And clearly when we do see what's there, and more importantly, when we see what may be redacted from what's there, I think we've crossed the Rubicon. We've crossed a line with that. And I think that's
just disgraceful.
But it's
disgraceful that we are talking in terms of doing a deal to allow justice to take its course. Doing a deal. My God, what has happened to the United States? It was a bastion of the rule of law. It was a place with transparency taken as a given and justice, equal justice for all. And we're reduced now to commenting about the fact you have to do a deal to get evidence released.
Right.
What has happened to your country?
I was speaking with Robin Gritz yesterday, and we sort of agreed that the FBI needs a historic, unprecedented, and totally transparent overhaul if it is to maintain any credibility at all.
Right. She's a former FBI person for Michael's benefit. So what we have here, Michael, are...
Well, you're...
Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, what we have here are some... Congress has asked a bunch of questions, but I have some real questions that have to be answered, I think, in order for this recent investigation, or the investigation of the recent period, 2015-16, to make any sense. You got to go back to 2001 to 2005 and understand exactly why Mueller, the man leading this investigation into Trump, why did Mueller and Comey fail to prosecute the Clinton Foundation frauds when they were so obvious? And I bring up this agreement that we have found here. You know, all you need to do is read this agreement, check the law, and you see that precisely as Mueller, anyway, and the Department of Justice cleared the Clinton Foundation or decided not to prosecute it sometime late in 2004, early in 2005, exactly then the Clinton Foundation was escalating its dramatic series of frauds. It's bank fraud, it's wire fraud, it's solicitation fraud, charity fraud. That's exactly when the thing exploded, around about November 18th, 2004 and afterwards. That's just when our vaunted FBI and Department of Justice under George W. Bush backed down. Doesn't make any sense. And right in 2005, this gentleman, Rod Rosenstein, you know, who vetted him? You know, he may be a fine human being. He may have a long, distinguished career as a lawyer, but he was involved with that Ranbaxy investigation. His signature is on the settlement, the $500 million settlement, and he evidently, his team, he in the Baltimore U.S. Attorney's Office, or the Maryland U.S. Attorney's Office, and Mueller as head of the FBI, evidently did not want to know the full extent to which Ranbaxy and other crooked drug manufacturers may have sold drugs and distributed drugs into the international system that were adulterated. He may not have wanted to know, in addition, how much money the promoters, the Singh brothers at Ranbaxy, Mr. Prasad at Matrix and others, how many hundreds of millions and billions those people made personally, changing the trajectory of their companies from being struggling small companies in India to being companies that could fasten themselves to the massive aid stream, AID, financial aid stream, that was coming out of our taxpayers, Michael, and your taxpayers and European taxpayers.
Yep.
You know, why did Rod Rosenstein drop the real hammer on all these people?
Wasn't there a DEA whistleblower towards the end of 2017 who came forward and said that he felt that the pharmaceutical companies and Congress had created the opiate crisis in the United States?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's a whole area, you know, that needs to be understood. There are open borders there to facilitate the transfer of opioids across our southern border. I mean, is there a reason for all that? Then also in Maryland...
You've got to watch You've got to watch bracket creep with this, or scope creep, I should say. The specific, easy, actionable, simple to understand thing is Trump has called his Clinton Foundation and its web corrupt. Hillary should be in jail, and yet there is no extant, obvious investigation into it. Why not? That's the simple thing. Why not, President Trump? What's wrong with you?
Yeah. Well, actually, to just correct you, there has been an IRS investigation that's still ongoing.
Is that right?
Yeah, since July of 2016 it was open. So what's going on with that investigation? Why does it take so long?
What happened?
IRS. Yeah, I see. When it's a taxation investigation, it's private. I mean, it's absolutely between the taxpayer and the government until criminal proceedings are instituted. Now, you're talking about the tax exposures in the US and the absence of compliance. I'm talking about crystal clear criminal activity that should be subject to open and justice manifestly being seen to be done, because you've got the same sort of legal system as we do. That's the way the criminal proceedings operate. We have been talking in chapter and verse about criminal activities, and we've named persons who we allege, or I allege, have been engaged in, and Bill Clinton is certainly one of them. And Trump has said the same thing about crooked Hillary, and yet there is no obvious investigation. Nobody has said, okay, well, I've been down to the police station and I filed a complaint, and here's the complaint number, here's the investigating officer responsible for it, and here's the next steps. That isn't happening. That's what we need.
Well, but just to correct one thing, you're right about, in the United States, you're right about individuals and even corporations being the subject of IRS investigations, that it would be kept private. But when it comes to a charity that's still soliciting, the IRS shouldn't have taken too long after July, whenever it was, 2016, to conclude immediately that this thing was and is a fraud. It is not authorized to fight HIV/AIDS validly. It is not authorized to fight climate change in Melbourne and to sell pharmaceuticals and to operate a massage parlor and catering operation in Little Rock. It's just not authorized for any of that. And it has been soliciting ever since the IRS opened this investigation. So at a certain point in time, does the IRS become complicit in the fraud?
Thank you. Well, God, isn't that... Oh. What an awful prospect. Is the IRS complicit in the... Well, I suppose prima facie it is, isn't it? I understand what you're saying about the desirability of charity investigations being made public so that people aren't fleeced, and this will be a classic example of where they are being fleeced. Gee whiz, Charles.
So I know it's late.
A mate of mine in Australia, he's a political advisor, very senior, vice prime ministers in Australia. And I was chatting with him about this the other day, and he said, mate, it's like a tightly wound ball of elastic, and it's just so tight like rubber band material, so tightly wound. You pull a little bit of it out, and you have a look at it, and you sort of look at it from another angle, let it go, bang, it snaps back into place, and it's just still this one single ball. He said, that's your difficulty. You've got to get it unravelled and get it laid out so that people can see it clearly. Otherwise, you're just sort of, tilting it windmills a little bit. And I think people have that belief because Trump is not actioning it. Well, if he's not doing it, is there really a case? You know what I mean?
Well, we'll stay tuned. And I know it's very late there, Michael.
Well said.
And,
thanks. Yeah.
And thank you so much for joining us for such a lengthy time, so late at night where you are. Thanks for all the excellent work that you continue to do.
Thank you.
was great to have
My
you, Michael.
pleasure. My pleasure, guys.
Yeah, and just
We will never
once
give up.
again,
We will never
when people who have been watching today who are interested in following Michael can find him on Twitter. Of course, he is going to be simply at MP Smith News. You can follow Michael on Twitter. You can see him on his website, michaelsmithnews.com. Thank you so much for joining us, Michael, and sharing your insight and sharing the artwork there on your website. Very, very good.
Thank you, gentlemen. Lovely.
Good on you, mate.
Good to chat. No worries, no drama. Good on you too. See you
Thank
later.
you. Thanks.
Take care. Take care. Well, Charles, that was great to have an international guest and reschedule the show to accommodate that. I like that. Keep everybody on their toes.
That's very good.
Now, Charles, I know you've got to go as well, and this is one of your least favorite topics, but you know, cryptocurrency once again going wild.
Is that right?
Well, there was an article on Zero Hedge, I think, on Monday, and of course, you know our friend Quinn Michaels, who's just been released from the hospital,
Good.
is recovering. He's doing well. Quinn has been speaking about something that he has dubbed the crypto conspiracy, which many people have scoffed off and laughed at. Quinn investigates quite a lot of activity surrounding Peter Thiel and various investments that he has and how those investments touch the world of cryptocurrency. We've heard many, many times how the blockchain upon which Bitcoin and Ethereum and Litecoin and all the other cryptos are based is highly resistant to hacking, but there are numerous concerns with some of the exchanges and various other ways that humans actually touch, speaking figuratively, these cryptocurrencies. But despite that, Ethereum is doing tremendously well. It's at $989 right now, which is a record high. Bitcoin's hovering around 14,000. So we definitely want to remind all the Bitcoin and Ethereum millionaires out there that Crowdsource the Truth is a community-sponsored news resource, and you have been tremendously helpful, Charles, in building the show and helping us to reach out to citizen journalists and independent journalists around the world. We've now been to Sweden, Australia. We're going to reach out to more independent voices around the world to help bolster some of your research and point out the amazing, insane criminal activity of the Clinton Foundation and the shocking number of complicit conspirators.
Well, thanks so much, Jason. And how, you're very shy, I know, you don't like to bring this up, but if somebody wanted to support Crowdsource the Truth financially, how would they do that?
Well, there's a number of ways. Of course, they can go to paypal.me, Crowdsource the Truth, and make a one-time sponsorship payment, or they can become a monthly sponsor on patreon.com, Crowdsource the Truth. We're accepting cryptocurrency for sponsorship, and those links are usually in the description box for each of the videos. I always like to reiterate that these are not donations. This is not a charitable organization. This is a private business, and people who enjoy the show, people who find themselves watching each day, should consider some form of sponsorship to help keep the company financially healthy, keep the company going, and allow the investigations and the broadcasts to continue through 2018. We've just passed 40,000 subscribers. So even if a small portion of the YouTube subscribers or the 16,000 Twitter followers were to become regular monthly sponsors, the company would be very healthy financially. And your research continues to amaze, and I think the reach of Sunday with Charles is really growing. We've seen that.
Thank you.
And a lot of people are becoming aware of some of these crimes that really need to be prosecuted.
Well, thanks for all your help. How, I was, in the early days of this, we got together and we did that, you did great work on that Mrs. Bill thing. How is that people starting to watch that again?
People have been starting to watch it. Of course, one of our viewers submitted it for consideration for a nomination for a Pulitzer Prize for political cartooning, which I really appreciate. We have so many wonderful Crowdsource community members who support the work and are helping us get the word out. Over 5,000 people have seen your visit to Mrs. Bill's Chappaqua data center, which unfortunately experienced a bit of spontaneous combustion yesterday. I certainly hope no computer equipment was damaged during that fire.
Right, and I think also in New York State, aren't there rules now that you're not supposed to burn anything in the house? You're not supposed to burn, maybe it was a wood fire or?
I don't know. Probably a hard drive fire, if there was to be one. All right, Charles, so we'll be seeing you again on Sunday
Yes,
for
sir.
another explosive report that might cause another fire in Chappaqua.
All right. Meanwhile, enjoy the rest of your week, and thanks everybody for watching.
Thank you,
Thanks for-
Charles. It's always a pleasure. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you soon.